and we appreciate Gerrit Dirkmaat coming to speak to us too. Dr. Gerrit Dirkmaat is Associate Professor of Church History and Doctrine at BYU. He received his PhD from the University of Colorado in 2010, studying 19th century American expansionism and foreign relations. His dissertation was Enemies, Foreign and Domestic U.S. Relations with Mormons in the U.S. Empire of North America. So that sounded a lot like our topic. At least, there were enemies or Mormons were in the 19th century. So we're happy to have Dr. Dirkmaat here. He worked as a historian and writer for the Church History Department on the Joseph Smith Papers Project, co-authored From Darkness Unto Light, Joseph Smith's translation and publication of the Book of Mormon, which I highly recommend. I love that book. Also a book recently, Let's Talk About the Translation of the Book of Mormon, dozens of articles, and he's one of the historians that published the first volume of Brigham Young Journals just recently, a couple years ago, 1 year ago. He also hosts a weekly podcast called Standard of Truth, which I personally love and highly recommend. I listen to lots of podcasts, but there's only one that I pay for. He has a free content, and also you can pay $10 a month, and he's the only one that I'll pay for because it's so entertaining and informative about church history, and it's a lot of fun. So please welcome Dr. Dirkmaat.
Thank you. Well, it's probably the right time to let everyone know what they're going to be paying for this presentation. You're going to be paying dearly in time. Thank you for that. Let me apologize right up front. I'm not going to be as connected to the Cook family. I'm of Dutch immigrant stock, but my dad was born in the Netherlands, so I'm not as connected to pioneer ancestors. At least on my dad's side. On my mom's side, I am. In fact, I noticed I have a third cousin here, so someone quite close to me on my mom's side. Brett Hale. I'm from Alabama, the fruit of Jonathan Hale. Yeah. Anyway, so I didn't. My marching orders from Marshall were to talk about some of the larger events surrounding the time period. The problem is when you give an open floor to a historian, because you're always like, oh, well, what led to what? Oh, well, so Adam and Eve saw a tree. I mean, it's really hard to get to where you can actually tell the story. So you have to forgive me if it feels like I'm going off on a tangent, because I am, and hopefully that it's at least somewhat entertaining of a tangent. It probably won't be. But I mean, it's a Saturday, it's raining outside. No one's taking money at the door. I want everyone to feel comfortable first and foremost. That's the reason why I thought, you know what, let's talk about politics. That's what, you know that you can really keep everyone together is when you talk about politics. So why I bring it up is because this time period in church history is really probably the most volatile time period there is. I mean, one could make an argument that in the 1880s, after the passage of the Edmunds Act and the Edmunds-Tucker Act, that the church was in possibly dire straits. But there was much more internal cohesion by then, whereas at the time of the murder of Joseph Smith, things were not clear. And I'm going to start there and I'll try to quickly move forward, just because it makes a difference in what's going on inside the mindset of your pioneer ancestors and what they're thinking about, what they're going through. By the end of 1843, Joseph Smith has come to several conclusions. He is wanting to find people that will support the Latter-day Saints. They've had hundreds of thousands of dollars of property stolen from them in Missouri. They've had dozens of people murdered with no one brought to trial in any way. No remuneration of any kind for anybody. And so as Joseph is trying to work his way to find some kind of solution, he finally makes a break with the Democratic Party. Latter-day Saints have been Democrats from the beginning, in general. I mean, obviously you can find one or two, but there would be elections where there'd be 8 votes for the other side, right? That's how how much they voted together. But after the things that had happened in Missouri with Democrat Governor Boggs and multiple Democratic presidents like Martin Van Buren, Joseph Smith, I'm going to share this quote with you, but you got to promise not to use it in elders quorum. I know the sisters aren't going to do it. They're going to be kind and polite. But someone in here is like, oh, well, I'll be putting that on my Facebook page right now. Joseph is so frustrated that in an interview he gives in 1843, he says, I swore by the eternal gods that I'll never vote for a Democrat again. And I intend to swear my children, putting their hands under the thighs, Abraham swore Isaac, that they will never vote a Democratic ticket in all their generations. It's the meanest, lowest party in all creation, the lowest, most tyrannical beings in the world. They opposed me in Missouri and are going to shoot me for treason. I've never committed any treason whatsoever. I mean, how do you really feel, Joseph? The other political party at the time was the Whig Party. I know it sounds terrible. It's the Hair Club for Men party, but it has its origins in English politics. And it's the other major political party. It was the party of evangelical Christianity. And so in general, Latter-day Saints were not treated very well by it because, we're all heretics. But Joseph makes the decision that he's going to support Henry Clay for president, who's the great compromiser. He writes Henry Clay a letter. He writes a letter to all the presidential candidates saying, hey, what are you going to do to help the Latter-day Saints if you're elected? Henry Clay writes back like every other politician does and says, I feel so bad for all those terrible things that happened. There's no possible way I can intervene. The reality is by 1843 and 1844, Latter-day Saints were so thoroughly hated in the United States that it was the political kiss of death for any politician to be seen as in any way supporting them. And so, now, look, this is going to be hard to believe, but not today, but back in the 19th century, politicians only cared about getting elected. Now, and they would lie, they would do all kinds of dishonest things in the 19th century. You have to remember, it's long ago, but back then, a politician would do whatever it took to get elected. And Henry Clay, one of those people. And so it places the Latter-day Saints in a very difficult position. Both declared presidential candidates have already said they're not going to have anything to do with the Saints. And so Joseph is going to declare himself a candidate for president. There's his presidential platform. But that's temporary. He knows he's not going to win. The whole point of running is just to give a voice for the Latter-day Saints' persecution. He makes the decision that they've got to leave. It's a difficult decision, but they've tried north, they've tried south, they've tried east, they've tried west, and he's come to the conclusion that Latter-day Saints cannot receive fair treatment inside the United States. That American democracy does not work for them. Because when you're a super hated minority, it will always be more beneficial for a politician in power to be a part of the persecution than to be on the side of your defense. And so Joseph begins making plans to leave. Now, the reason why I bring that up is the first part of your pioneer ancestors' mindset is that they're not leaving the United States because, you know what, we've heard there's some great water out there with that giant salt lake, we think that it'll be way easier to farm than anywhere in Illinois. Have you ever been to Illinois? You can throw corn anywhere. It's growing. When I went on my mission to Wisconsin, and I'm from Idaho, okay, which has a fairly similar climate. I'm southeast Idaho. Fairly similar climate to here in Goshen, where if you don't irrigate it, it doesn't grow at all, right? And so when I was in Wisconsin on my mission, it was what they called a drought. This is what they said to me. They're like, oh, we don't know what we're going to do. It's been so terrible. It was such a bad drought. There's literally standing water everywhere I look. My Idaho farm boy mentality was like, you could throw an irrigation pump in that lake right there. It'd do the whole valley. But all they did was dry farming. So one of the points that Jenna touched on was that water is always going to be a huge issue because they're going from a place where the biggest problem in Nauvoo with water is how do we get rid of it? It's flooding everything. And the biggest problem in Utah is the exact opposite. How do we have enough water to sustain ourselves? Anyway, so as they're getting ready to leave, they're thinking about different places to go. They consider going to Texas because it was an independent country at the time. Because the whole point is to get outside of the United States. They even plan to go to Texas, and then Texas gets annexed by the United States. And so they immediately drop it. Because the whole point is to get out of the United States. Unfortunately for them, the United States is going to expand faster than they can run away from it. As they are getting ready to leave, we'll talk about that in a second. As persecution gets worse, of course, Joseph Smith is going to be murdered. And that really kind of seals in the minds of Latter-day Saints in Nauvoo everything that they had already thought, right? The persecution had gotten so bad that they even murdered Joseph Smith, even though that he'd been promised to be defended. The murder of Joseph Smith does not do anything to help allay this kind of fear of persecution the saints have. In fact, it demonstrates that it's a reality. There's a grand total of 0 people that are convicted of the murder of Joseph Smith. Never mind the fact there's hundreds of witnesses. No one's on it. And it's not just the murder of the Smiths. By 1845, there are multiple monocratic movements urged on by newspapers, urged on by politicians, that are burning Mormon houses and threatening to exterminate the Mormons from Illinois. Now the term is pretty loaded for someone who's come out of Missouri. And so eventually the saints are going to make the decision to leave, but even as they make it with a new fear. For Joseph and the leaders of the church at his time, the problem with the federal government was the federal government wouldn't do anything. The federal government just sat back and watched them be murdered and watched them be burned out and refused to do anything because if they did, they'd lose their votes. As they're preparing to leave Nauvoo, they start receiving reports that are the exact opposite of that. That in fact the federal government is going to intervene, but the federal government's going to intervene in a way that they don't want them to. Samuel Brannan, who's famous for taking the saints around on the ship Brooklyn, he will send Brigham Young some information. He's in D.C., so he's like the church's liaison there. And he'll tell him that he's heard from the Secretary of War that they were laying plans to intercept the Mormons and keep them from moving. They say it will not do to let the Mormons go to California nor Oregon, neither will let them do to tarry in the states, but they must be obliterated from off the face of the earth. Not a great thing to receive. And Brigham Young's receiving these letters. Matters are made worse because Thomas Ford, who's my favorite person to hate, sorry, that slipped out. The governor of Illinois, who's also a terrible person, that also slipped out. I can't stop myself. There's no way. Governor Ford, however complicit he was in the murder of Joseph Smith, likely he's just incredibly incompetent. He's certainly complicit in one other thing, and that is he brags about later in his book that he lies to the Mormons and tells them that a federal army is coming to kill them, and if they don't leave immediately, they're going to get stuck there when the army comes. So Latter-day Saints are not leaving Nauvoo. You might have wondered, why do I see scenes of people crossing the Mississippi River on the ice? Why didn't they, wait till it wasn't snowing? I realize in Western Illinois that's like April, but still, why did they wait until it was warmer? Because they believed that an army was coming to kill them. So they left Nauvoo, not, a fond farewell, boy. They're leaving it in panic. In panic because they believe not just that their government doesn't care about them, but their government is actively trying to kill them. And that's something that you see play out. In fact, this is one of the things that Brigham Young says. If we can get 100 miles beyond the jurisdiction of the United States, we are safe. Safety to them was getting outside of the United States. That's where we can be safe. And that's all we ask. We'll move in a solid body until we get beyond the limits of the United States so that we can protect ourselves. They see the United States as an enemy because they believe that it's working against their interests. And so they leave. And you know what, to give you an idea of how they feel about it, having been burned out of multiple places and now armies threatening to exterminate them again, this is Orson Pratt. This is not usually the image you see of Orson Pratt, because we usually see him, because we have photographs of him later, and he's got a really long beard and looks kind of like the guy from Home Alone there you go. There's the Orson Pratt you all know him of, but he's going to publish something in the Times and Seasons in the last publication that lets you know exactly how he feels about what's going on with the saints. The time is at hand for me to take a long and lasting farewell to these eastern countries, being included with my family among the tens of thousands of American citizens who have the choice of death or banishment beyond the Rocky Mountains. I prefer the latter. It is with the greatest of joy that I forsake this republic, and all the saints have abundant reasons to rejoice that they are counted worthy to be cast out as exiles from this wicked nation. For we've received nothing but one continual scene of the most horrid and unrelenting persecutions at their hand for the last 16 years. If our Heavenly Father will preserve us and deliver us out of the hands of the bloodthirsty Christians of these United States, and not suffer any more of us to be martyred to gratify their holy piety, I for one shall be very thankful. Perhaps we may have to suffer much in the land of our exile, but our sufferings will be from another cause. There will be no Christian banditti to afflict us all the day long. No holy pious priests to murder us by scores. No editors to urge on house burnings, devastation, and death. If we die in the dens and the caves of the Rocky Mountains, we shall die where freedom reigns triumphantly. Liberty in a solitary place and in a desert is far more preferable than martyrdom in these pious states. How do you feel, Orson Pratt? Right? I mean, Orson Pratt always willing to say how he felt. Actually, never had to ask him twice what his opinion was. Every one of you has a friend like that, and if you're thinking, I don't really have a friend like that, guess what? It's you. You're the one, and that's why. So of course, they're going to make this trek across Iowa, and here the Lord is going to confirm some of the things that they're already feeling with Doctrine and Covenants, section 136. Thy brethren have rejected you in your testimony, even the nation that has driven you out. Here the voice of the Lord is confirming what they already feel. This nation has rejected us, and we've been driven out. This is not a matter of, you know what? I can't wait to take a walk through Wyoming. It's more a matter of safety than it is because of preference. In winter quarters, of course, the church is going to be reorganized, but the Latter-day Saints are moving out to what is at the time Mexico. In fact, on the 24th of July, a good friend of mine, he because we've had these conversations, he flew a Mexican flag. He's like, well, this is where we went to Mexico. I mean, everyone flies this American flag. We were desperate to get out of the United States. Why are we flying an American flag? I have a Council of 50 flag of the Kingdom flag. So I fly that, but on Pioneer Day, every other day, American. But you can see they're on their way into what is then Mexican territory, and they'll be here for well over a year before the Mexican War brings that land into the United States. The Latter-day Saints are going to volunteer in the Mexican War, as everyone knows, with the Moor Battalion, but that service is seen at first as something that they're doing because their prophet commanded them to do. In the aftermath, with the way the federal government continues to treat them, they start to see it in a much more sinister way. Brigham Young, for instance, will say, when they first get to the Salt Lake Valley, that all the governors and presidents of the United States had rejected all of our petitions from the first until the last. that when the Saints were driven from Illinois and to perish, as it were, on the prairies, then President Polk sends for a draft of 500 men to go into the army. But Brigham, does feel like raising the battalion was for their temporal salvation. They used that money to help get more poor people across the plains. This is not directly related, but as I said, politics are kind of a big deal. The Latter-day Saints, when they moved to Iowa, there's a decision that's made while they're there. Now, as they get to Iowa, Iowa's would barely become a state, just in 1846. So very little population. The whole western portion of Iowa isn't even organized into counties. The Democratic Party of Iowa, seeing these thousands of Latter-day Saints moving in, decide, aha, great, because they had barely won the last election. So they meet with the Latter-day Saint representatives. They're like, we're going to pass a bill to make sure that you can still vote, because they're in these non-organized county areas. So they rush a bill through the legislature that allows the Latter-day Saints in the Council Bluffs area to vote. And in the meantime, the Latter-day Saints start meeting with the Whig representatives in Iowa. And Brigham Young kind of makes a judicious decision. He believes that Zachary Taylor is going to win the presidential election. He's the Whig candidate for president. And presidents are the ones who are going to decide what happens to those territories out there in the West. And so they make a decision to instead vote for the Whig ticket. To give you an idea, that back in the 19th century, politics was very hypocritical. When the election returns started coming in, and the Democrats who controlled the Iowa politics, when they saw that the votes were coming in from Potawatomi, is what they called it, that they were going for the Whig candidates, the Democrats then refused to count any of those votes, claiming that the law that they had passed was actually unconstitutional. So their argument was, the law we passed to allow the Mormons vote, we should never have passed that in the first place because they voted for the wrong people. And it actually goes all the way to a federal investigation. So it's another example of just how caught up in political difficulties Latter-day Saints found themselves. Now, even among members, they're not just all fighting over water rights and where to graze their cattle. The members feel very strongly politically. It's a pretty big deal to go from everybody voting a Democratic ticket to all of a sudden people voting for the Whig Party. Almon Babbitt is a dyed-in-the-wool Democrat. He's such a partisan that when he ends up representing Utah Territory in the legislature, other Democrats will contact Brigham Young and say, you gotta bring this guy home. Like, he's hurting you because he's so politically partisan. He's just so rabid in his partisanship. Again, hard to believe anyone would be like that, but in the 19th century, people would be so political that they would hate other people just for belonging to the other party. Eventually, Babbitt sets his sights on Orson Hyde, who's the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, but also someone who's being very loud about the Whigs. And they start attacking each other in the newspapers in Iowa. And when Brigham Young finds out, he sends a letter to Orson Hyde, because eventually Orson Hyde's able to pull rank, right? I mean, that's one of the benefits of being the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, right? So eventually he's able to disfellowship Almon Babbitt for attacking him in the paper. When Brigham Young finds out, he sends this letter. He says, we don't care a groat. A groat's a worthless English penny. We don't care a groat about your political differences, but we wish to say to you to not allow trivial matters to influence you in the least, and never, never drag priesthood and political Gentile warfare. Let no religious test be required or the holy influence and power of the priesthood be brought to bear in any political question. If the intrinsic merits of all such matters will not furnish arguments sufficient for all necessary purposes, then let them go. For it is better for the whole political fabric, corrupt as we know it to be, that it should tatter and go to destruction than for one saint to be offended. when they arrive, as more and more people arrive in Utah Territory, they're going to attempt to create this large, giant state of Deseret. Zachary Taylor, who at first is willing to allow the Latter-day Saints their territory, is actually derailed by someone we know from Latter-day Saint history. This is Joseph Smith's brother, William Smith. Right as they're debating whether or not Utah should become a state, William Smith writes a giant remonstrance against the admission of the state and claims all kinds of things. That Brigham Young has hired, people to come murder him, which is kind of a weird thing because 2 years later, William Smith writes to Brigham Young and says, "Is there any way I can get back into being one of the 12 apostles?" Like, you realize I sent death squads to kill you, right? But William Smith says a lot of things. Zachary Taylor is so dissuaded by this that he refuses to sign off on Utah becoming a territory. And in fact, at least reportedly says, Utah will not become a territory as long as I am living. And then he dies a couple weeks later. Now look, I don't know, I'm not saying anything I'm just saying, Latter-day Saints certainly believed maybe something you shouldn't do is say as long as I'm living. I'm not putting that. But anyway, Millard Fillmore was his vice president, becomes president, and he's going to appoint Brigham Young to be the governor of the territory, as well as several other Latter-day Saints into high political offices. It comes in as part of the Compromise of 1850, and so you can see these two territories are carved out of what came of the Mexican cession. The federal officers that are appointed to the territory, everyone's happy about Brigham Young, and also Zerubbabel Snow. So if you're looking for a name for one of your children, Zerubbabel, is also a Latter-day Saint, but the other members of the Supreme Court and the Secretary of the Territory were not. And almost immediately there is conflict. And this conflict kind of sets the stage for what's going to happen for the remainder of the 1850s. Territorial positions like Supreme Court and Secretary of the Territory, those things sound really big. I mean, I'd love to be a member of the Supreme Court of a territory. That sounds like suddenly I've arrived, In the 1850s and 60s and 70s, in fact, all throughout the 19th century, these offices were highly sought after because they came with federal funds. But the real reason why they were sought after is for graft purposes. Because the real way that you made money as a governor of Oregon Territory was by having people pay you off to sign off on the land grant that they're looking for. So when these officials arrive in Utah Territory, one of the problems that they find immediately is the people are far more concerned with this God thing than they are with the ability to make money. They listen to Brigham Young far more than they listen to us. And these are the other aspect of people being appointed to territorial positions is they were almost all failed politicians in the East. They couldn't get appointments in places that mattered, but they still were from important families, like Broughton Harris. His dad's a really important judge in Pennsylvania, and so you really have to make sure you keep him happy. But also Broughton Harris is terrible at everything that he does. So what do you do? I know, I'll just make him a secretary of Utah Territory, right? And one study has demonstrated that about 75% of the federal officers that are assigned to territories, not Utah, to all of the territories in the West, about 75% of them will leave their jobs before it's over because it's not easy and they get caught in all kinds of graft, and so it's a volatile position. Broughton Harris, started off on the right foot by showing up to his position almost a year and a half late, and then when he got there, he turned around and said, "Hey, I know that you guys had a census and that you've had elections for the territorial offices based on that census, But because you didn't do it on the proper census forms that I have, that I didn't bring with me because I was a year late getting here, all of your elections are invalid because you have to use my special forms. Brigham Young is a much more practical person that is like, yeah, you weren't here and we had to have an election, so we did, right? And Harris refuses to distribute the federal funds. Harris has got a problem at home as well. He takes his wife to a gala when they first get there. They're being treated very well. Takes his wife to a gala at Heber C. Kimball's home and is horrified as he meets Mrs. Kimball, as she meets Mrs. Kimball and then meets Mrs. Kimball, and then meets Mrs. Kimball, and also meets Mrs. Kimball, and then continues to meet Mrs. Kimball throughout the night. And so she goes back home and she demands that they leave the territory. You can't ever, I don't want to be here anymore. The result of things really comes to a head, though, in 1851 with this person by the name of Perry Brocas. When I was first studying Utah history, I didn't actually know how to pronounce his name. Because, I mean, you could say that, it could be Brocas, it could be, I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm pretty sure that it was pronounced Brocas, because Latter-day Saints began spelling his name phonetically, but to accentuate the latter part of his name, so that it said broke. Anyway, broke donkey, yes, that's how they were. Which kind of gives you an idea of what Latter-day Saints thought of Perry Brocas. Perry Brocas asks, when he gets to Utah Territory, he asks if he can speak at General Conference. Okay, so this is a Gentile, and Brigham Young says, okay. And he tells Brigham, I want to speak at General Conference because we're building the Washington Monument. You know the same Washington Monument in D.C. there, the big spire there, the obelisk. The way they wanted to build it was they wanted every state and every territory to contribute at least one of the major foundational blocks of granite so that it could come from everybody. So Perry Brocas tells Latter-day Saints, tells Brigham Young, I'm going to speak and I'm going to ask for the donations to build the monument. Instead, he gets up and he begins haranguing the Latter-day Saints, telling them that they were wrong to believe that the federal government ever done anything wrong to them, that nothing had ever happened to them that wasn't their own fault, and then went on to say that it was unfortunate that the women of Utah Territory were so unvirtuous because of the practice of polygamy. Now, this is the 19th century, where if you insulted someone's honor, people would have duels. And so Brigham Young will get up after him and say, if it were not for me, I guarantee you there would be people here that would grab your beard and slit your throat. Because he basically said that all of the women in the territory were adulteresses. They're eventually going to leave. Brigham Young is going to explain where his feelings. I love the government and Constitution of the United States, but I do not love the damn rascals who administer the government. I know Zachary Taylor is dead and damned, and I cannot help it. I'm indignant at such corrupt fellows as Judge Brocas coming here to lecture us on morality and virtue. It is an insult to this congregation to throw out such insinuations. Now, one of the things that these officials flee the territory, they come to be known as the runaway officials. When they flee the territory, they take all kinds of insinuations back, trying to justify why they'd abandoned their post. President Millard Fillmore, one of the reasons why the Latter-day Saints venerate Millard Fillmore is instead of just reacting and saying, well, all these officials must be right, Fillmore ordered an investigation. The investigation found there was no cause at all for these territorial officials to leave, and so he ordered them back to their post, but they refused to go, and so they were fired. But one of the insinuations that they took with them was that Latter-day Saints were practicing plural marriage. So that was in 1851 and 52, the runaway officials. And so in 1852, the church begins to publicly declare and teach that polygamy is being practiced. Everyone already knew in Utah, but it wasn't something that was announced to the world. And Orson Pratt, the same Orson Pratt of fiery indignation, is dispatched by Brigham Young to go to the East, where he publishes a newspaper called The Seer, where he defends and explains why it is they were commanded to practice plural marriage. If you ever have a chance to read it, you'll find things in it you're like, oh, I don't know what you're doing there. Because in it, Orson Pratt describes exactly how a plural marriage ceremony works. And I mean exactly how a plural marriage ceremony works. Like, as you're reading it, you're like, pretty sure we're not supposed to be saying that outside the temple. Read it to yourself. In fact, Brigham Young will get mad and like, why did you publish the temple ceremony to the world? He's like, I thought that's what you wanted me to do. I didn't want you to publish the words. But anyway, of course, Brigham Young is also going to teach that along with plural marriage, Utah becomes the leader, the country's leader in divorce. Because divorce is almost impossible to get in 19th century America. Generally, you had to prove adultery to get a divorce. Women couldn't get a divorce without proof. How are you going to prove adultery? They didn't have DNA. And so, point of fact, most women who were in terrible marriages either left their husbands and went and married someone else in another state, or they just stayed in their terrible marriage. In Utah, women very early on were granted the right to initiate irreconcilable differences divorce, and men were forced to give a third of their property if a divorce was initiated. Well, it becomes scandalous because once the Transcontinental Railroad is completed, people in New York who couldn't get a divorce in New York would hop on a train, ride it out to Utah Territory, get off the train, get a divorce, hop back on the train, and go back to New York. And because the Constitution requires you to recognize the contracts of other states, they go back to New York and say, see, we're divorced. And so you had all kinds of newspapers saying, not only are these Mormons destroying our families with polygamy, now they're destroying our families with divorce. But the whole idea of free and easy divorce was so that, polygamy was something that people had to enter into with their agency, and they could leave, or at least women could leave whenever they wanted. Men, on the other hand, had a harder time. So in 1854, let me show you this map real quick. All of this territory that had previously been designated to be free territory is reorganized as open to slavery by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And that causes the collapse of the Whig Party. The Whig Party is done. And from its ashes arises the Republican Party. The Republican Party is like the Whig Party before it. It has a core of evangelical Christians in it. But unlike the Whig Party that was essentially watery on slavery, the Whig Party kind of went both ways, trying to be a national party. Zachary Taylor was a Whig and he owned 300 slaves, The Republican Party instead was avowedly opposed to the expansion of slavery, but it wasn't just the expansion of slavery. Their first presidential platform in 1856 is going to say that they need to eliminate from the territories the two twin relics of barbarism, polygamy and slavery. And so it's an avowedly anti-Mormon party from its get-go. And they begin trying to pass anti-Mormon, anti-polygamy laws. In fact, at one point there's a petition made by a Republican lawmaker to purchase thousands of copies of the Book of Mormon to distribute them all over the country, with the idea being that if only people read the Book of Mormon, then no one would become a Mormon. And you can only imagine, like, breaking up, no, please don't do that. Don't distribute the Book of Mormon everywhere. That would sure stop us. But not only is the Republican Party avowedly anti-Mormon, it also puts up for their first presidential candidate, John C. Fremont. Well, I thought we liked John C. Fremont. He did explorations in California. John C. Fremont just so happens to be the son-in-law of the Missouri Senator, Thomas Hart Benton, who is the most anti-Mormon senator in the United States Senate. So when Latter-day Saints find out, not only does this Republican Party hate us, they put up as their presidential candidate the son-in-law of the person who hates us most. You can imagine what the reaction was. This is the 1856 election. Now, in the meantime, other federal officials have been appointed. So during the same time period that Phineas Cook's getting ready to make his first attempt at settling in Goshen, the political instability in Utah comes to a head again. This time because another territorial Supreme Court justice by the name of William Drummond, he is going to also run away from his post, and again make a huge deal out of the fact that the Mormons were a bunch of polygamists who only followed Brigham Young. This guy's the greatest hypocrite that's, again, hard to believe a politician's a hypocrite, but he's by far the greatest hypocrite there is, because he's going to attack the Latter-day Saints for the fact that they practice polygamy. But in fact, William Drummond leaves his wife, his legally married wife, when he's appointed. He goes to D.C. to get his appointment. He picks up a prostitute named Ada Carroll that he takes with him to Utah Territory, and he introduces this woman of the night as Mrs. Drummond. But in point of fact, he's literally married to someone else. Again, hard to believe a politician's hypocritical, but at least in this case, they were. One of the things he's going to claim is that Mormons, on the order of Brigham Young, broke into a law office and burned all the records of the territorial legislature, burned the entire territorial library. Now, one of the things that's actually very easy to determine is whether or not a library's been burned down. It's very simple. When someone says, "Oh no, Bill burned the library down," you can go over and look at the library, and if it's still there, then he probably didn't burn it down. It's one of the easier things to determine, right? Are the books existing? Yes, here they are. Okay, I guess they weren't burned. But instead of doing what Millard Fillmore did, James Buchanan, who is the new president of the United States, he reacts with vitriol. He reacts and declares that the Latter-day Saints are in open rebellion to the United States in 1857. So back then, presidents didn't become president until March, and you had to wait longer. There was a longer lame duck period. But he almost immediately orders the army, and a huge portion of it, to march out to Utah. And so the same year, the same time period that you have Phineas Cook looking to settle Goshen, it's in that same time period that the governor, that the president has ordered troops out here. And again, as she said, without any contact with Brigham Young. And the newspapers are not reporting, hey, the army's on the way out to kind of escort the new governor there, and we're going to say hi. No, the newspapers are saying things like, the army's on the way out to kill the Mormons. So if you happen to be a Mormon, and you read a newspaper that says, the army's on its way to kill you, remember, this isn't your first rodeo. There's twice before that militias have been on their way to your capital. And they were there to kill you. It's not an overreaction to think that the army's on its way to kill you, because everyone is saying that it's on its way to kill you. In fact, we have letters from the troops themselves in the army. After we're done killing the Mormons, we'll probably find some good land in this place. I mean, so they think they're coming to kill the Mormons. Stephen Douglas. So this is James Buchanan's proclamation of rebellion against the Latter-day Saints. But this is what Stephen Douglas is saying in the halls of Congress. What is the army going to do? It will become the duty of Congress to apply the knife and cut out this loathsome, disgusting ulcer. No temporizing policy, no halfway measure will then answer. Now that doesn't sound like they're looking for compromise. And that's in fact why the Latter-day Saints react by believing that the army is coming to kill them. Because people like Stephen Douglas, who's the head of the Democratic Party, is saying the army's coming to kill you. So people react like, oh, maybe you actually mean what you're saying. We have multiple accounts of Brigham Young's reaction to this in Wilford Woodruff's journal here. They try to send messengers to the army to say, hey, we're not in rebellion, but you can't just come guns blazing into Utah because, again, this isn't our first rodeo. I sent word to General Harney that I wish for peace. He's at first the leader of what will become Johnston's army. I do not wish to fight anybody, but he must not come here with his army, and if he undertakes it, I shall stop him. And then how are they going to react to this? Again, they didn't leave on great terms with the United States to begin with. The nation is determined to make us free. They're determined to drive us to defend ourselves and become independent. The nation is breaking to pieces in spirit. There is no union among them. Before the United States get through trying to destroy us, they will want to let out the job. And I told the people years ago that if they would let alone, we would convert and revolutionize the world. If they did not let us alone, but undertake to break us up, we should spread abroad the faster and do the work much sooner. We will do this if the nation now makes war upon us. We will be free and we will build up the kingdom of God sooner. The people have tried all the time to destroy us, but they have failed all the time. When the government called for 500 of our men, they had no idea that we would comply with their request. This plan was laid to destroy the saints. And Thomas Benton then had orders in his pocket to destroy the Mormons if they refused. Jesus said that the time would come when we should all sell our coat and buy a sword. That time has come. And we have got to go and deliver ourselves from our enemy, and the Lord will help us. He will fight our battles. The people now feel to say that it is the kingdom of God or nothing. It is not my farm or my house, but the kingdom of God. This is the case with this people, where they are forced to deal with this external pressure that's coming. The army, we could read lots of quotes about how they feel about this. Spoiler alert, they don't feel good about it. But this is Wilford Woodruff opining on it, that the darkness covers the world and covers the United States. The Lord will soon come out of his hiding place in his fury, and he will vex the nation in his hot displeasure. So this is 1857 and 1858. You have to remember that Joseph Smith has twice, once in the form of a revelation, received revelation that there was a civil war coming to the United States. Now to us, living in the 21st century, it seems like civil war was inevitable. Like, of course there was going to be a civil war over slavery. But that's not what it was for most of the United States. When Joseph received that revelation in 1832, nobody thought there would actually be a civil war in the United States. In fact, even when the Civil War broke out, no one thought there would actually be any fighting. That's why rich people from D.C. and from Richmond went out in carriages to go watch the Battle of Bull Run, because they thought, we're just going to see the two armies will yell at each other, and then the South will back down, and we'll go back to being a country. That didn't happen. So Latter-day Saints view all of these. They view all of these comings and goings, I should say, in terms of the prophecies of the prophet Joseph Smith. He said there was going to be a civil war, and then they murdered Joseph Smith. The Book of Mormon says, when you cast the righteous out from among you, then the judgments of God shall surely come. Well, we got cast out. And so they see this disillusion, and this army coming to Utah is just another example of it. As was mentioned, one of the most negative things that takes place is Latter-day Saints perpetrate the Mountain Meadows Massacre in 1857, in part over these tensions surrounding the army marching to Utah. Now, Brigham Young and other church leaders don't know it. They're lied to and told that the Indians did it on their own. And only later do they discover not. In fact, even in Wilford Woodruff's journal in 1860, he writes, we passed the place where the Indians perpetrated that horrible massacre. So, and he doesn't lie to himself in his journal, right? He's very forthright in his journal. That's one of the things that takes place. The presence of the army in Utah, so they come into the valley, they negotiate, they don't end up killing everybody. But the Latter-day Saints, many of them moved from Salt Lake, they moved to the south. That actually puts more pressure on these surrounding communities here. Because now you have a bunch of displaced people coming from the south, and they're also looking, and not every displaced person goes back after the army comes. So that puts even more pressure on Goshen, Payson, Santa Quinn, at least at first. What happens after that is Goshen ends up being placed in a really keen location for profiting off of the soldiers. This is Albert Sidney Johnson, who leads the U.S. troops. He's also one of the greatest ironies in American history. He's ordered to put down the first rebellion in this United States. He gets out to Utah, and of course, the Mormons aren't actually rebelling. But less than a year and a half later, he is going to be the highest ranking field officer in the actual rebellion of the Confederate States of America. Talk about, hypocrisy, right? He's out there to put down the rebellion, and then he's going to be the highest ranking commander. He's going to die in the Battle of Shiloh, which is why you don't hear about him as much as Robert E. Lee. But at the time that the army comes, right, there's Goshen right there, and the army's going to not be in Salt Lake. They're going to be there at what is originally Camp Floyd, and then they rename it to Camp Crittenden. And you can see they're both on the same side of the lake. And so there opens up a great deal of commerce between the settlers in Goshen and the army in the fort, and it actually brings in a ton of money. So here's an example of this. This is a biography of an early Goshen settler, Hans Jasperson. Okay, he has a rough time. He converts to the church in 1854. They say he's in England. He sails over. His dad dies on the way over, so they're already hurting a little bit. And they eventually, make their way out. They get to Utah in 1854. They have nothing. They're poor, and then you have the resultant drought and famine that also takes place, making it even worse. He eventually goes to Provo, and he's hired out to work on some various things. But he explains, we were a large family, and we had nothing to eat. We sold one of our oxen for 13 baskets of corn, and we lived mostly on that. We got some bran and shorts and made bread of it during the winter of 1856. He says that we had nothing but wooden shoes to wear, and our clothing was made up of the tents that they took across the plains. That's how poor they are. He explains that in the spring of 1857, we left Provo and we moved to Goshen. We went to work grubbing the large greasewood and sagebrush. So apparently, again, hard to believe there's sagebrush out here. They're clearing it, and we built ditches and the dam so that we could get water on our farming ground. We then made another dugout, about the same as the one we lived before, and we put up a large fort made of cedar posts and sod. Early the next spring, we planted our crops, which consisted of wheat, corn, buckwheat, and flax. I left in April of 1858 with 5 other men to move the poor people of Salt Lake south as we were expecting Johnston's army to come. So residents of Goshen are going to go up to try to bring people out of where they think the army is coming. He then says that they came to the Salt Lake Valley but did no harm, and then they came to Camp Floyd about 23 miles from where we were living. We raised a very good crop that season. And I was busy hauling straw to Camp Floyd, and the people seemed very glad to get it, as they had had a very hard winter, and they paid us our money in gold, from $1 pieces up to $40. And they bought lots of mules and horses and wagons and guns of all kinds of merchandise. I then got the first pair of leather shoes, because remember he was wearing wooden shoes up to that. I got my first pair of leather shoes and my first comfortable clothes since I'd been in Utah. 6 years he's been in Utah. And he finally got a real pair of clothes and a real pair of shoes from the army settling, because the army brought cash in. Oh, how about that? Okay, so you should come up and tell the story. Oh, okay. I guarantee that everybody in this room knows more about it than I do at some point. It's an example of how, even though this was a trial, in the end, the Lord is going to turn this to their benefit. The army coming terrifies people, causes all kinds of people to leave their homes in Utah, causes the work to progress, a progression in Goshen to stop because of it. And in the end, it brought also an influx of currency that helped lift people like Hans Jasperson out of his total poverty to where he at least had some means of supporting himself. There was not very much cash in early Utah, so that was always one of the problems. All right. There it is. Speaking of problems, some of the problems, people felt were going the other way. She shared some of the problems that Phineas Cook felt that they were dealing with in the valley, but other people also shared their issues. This is the founder of Payson writing to Brigham Young, complaining about the people in Goshen. Last week, Brother McBride and myself went to examine our hay grounds on the prairie belonging to Brother Strand and myself, and found about 30 of the brethren from Goshen engaged in cutting that hay, which is our only resource for hay. And the whole herd ranging throughout and damaging that which was not cut. And when they say, hey, we're not talking about like alfalfa, like you're thinking of today, what they mean is the prairie grass that would grow to a certain height, and then you could cut it in early July or late June and bundle it the same way you did hay. Obviously, it was not nearly as good as alfalfa hay is, but it was how you support it. So they were fighting over these finite resources, as she talked about. If the men of Goshen are really to have all of that they claim to have in this country or in this district, there will be a sorry prospect for us. So you can see that how they are responding to that. Now, in 1860, so I know we're kind of on the tail end, I'm probably out of time too, so should I just quit or do you want to hear a little more? Okay. The next presidential election comes around. And in this case, it's a much bigger problem for the Latter-day Saints. Because Abraham Lincoln, who's the head of the Republican Party, is the head of this party that has avowedly anti-Mormon sentiments. In fact, in 1860, right before the secession, one of the Republican Congressional Committee publishes this speech given by a Republican congressman talking about the Homestead Act. Now, we learn about the Homestead Act in school, and it's like, oh yeah, they were trying to give land away to people. Well, many people don't know that it was a purposefully anti-Mormon bill. It was designed to try to destroy Mormonism. In fact, Republican land policy, homes for the million, give the public lands to the people and you settle the slavery question, obliterate the frontiers, dispense with the standing army, and extinguish Mormonism. I wonder what they think about Mormonism. It's hard to tell. But one of the great parts about studying history is that people were like overtly anti-Mormon back then. Like they didn't try to hide, like today people like be super anti-Mormon, like I don't have a problem with them building a temple, I just don't want it built here or for them to exist at all. And so they kind of, but back then they were proud of it. They were really proud of themselves for being anti-Mormon. And you can see some of the things that he's saying in here. That they are filled with licentiousness, they murder your citizens. The only way to abolish polygamy, the only way to render the abolition of polygamy effectual in the territories is to pass this bill. And he says that they're going to overwhelm the polygamists of Utah beneath the advancing tread of Christian civilization. The idea is, if you give all the land in Utah away to settlers, you'll get more settlers here that aren't Mormons than Mormons. Then they'll be able to vote out all the Mormons who are in office, and then we won't have any more Mormons. That's the plan, right? Spoiler alert, it didn't work. And in 1860, so again, on the same year that the secession crisis is going to happen, is, Wilford Woodruff talks about how Goshen gets its new bishop that they're going to get in 1860, and that's William Price. And he comes in, they ordain him to be, again, the Goshen branch, although he writes branch for some reason, I'm not sure why. The 1860 election is super divided, but in the end, of course, you have all of these territories, all these states secede. Think about the position the Latter-day Saints are in. The party that won is the party that's trying to destroy them. The Republican Party has tried to pass multiple anti-polygamy bills. They're trying to pass this homestead bill, which they believe will destroy the church. And they're also the ones who won. The party that lost, the party of secession, the Democratic Party, is the party that's forming this new Confederate States of America generally. And so it places the Latter-day Saints in this very difficult position. Loyalty to the country means loyalty to the party trying to destroy our church. That's what it means. Disloyalty, though, makes you a traitor to the country. So how do you negotiate that? Well, here's Brigham Young talking about this as the secession crisis is going on. In the afternoon, the president exhorted the people to do right and sanctify themselves, to leave off their drinking. Brigham Young's always trying to get people to stop drinking. Apparently everyone's just drunk all the time. He remarked, Brother Taylor has showed us the dissolution of the Union and the prospect of Zion being redeemed. The president remarked, are we prepared to go to Jackson County? The president used a few expletives against James Buchanan and remarked that he has broken up the government. Now, I'm sorry that it's tough for you to hear that perhaps Brigham Young cursed out James Buchanan. For me, it kind of made me smile inside, like, yes, finally someone told James Buchanan what he deserved to hear. So when they find out about this, there's all kinds of reaction because they know that Joseph prophesied there would be a war. They know that Joseph said it was going to be terrible. They know the party that is the federal government now is the Republican Party. And in fact, the Republican Party then almost immediately begins to pass their anti-Mormon bills that they weren't able to pass before. And so it places them in this difficult situation. The president remarked that Abel Lincoln, I don't know, he called him Abel all the time. At least that's how Wilford Woodruff writes it. Almost every time they refer to Abraham Lincoln, they call him Abel. I don't know if that's some biblical, it's obviously a little bit of a shot. That Abel Lincoln had expressed a determination to keep the Union in good condition as he received it. He remarked that Abel Lincoln was no friend to Christ. Particularly, he had never raised his voice in our favor when he was aware we were being persecuted. He was acquainted with Joseph and Hiram and had been a master Freemason. At that time, he would show what course he would pursue. So, Latter-day Saints today, of course, venerate Abraham Lincoln like many Americans do. But there's a reason why Latter-day Saints then didn't. Because he's the head of a party trying to, look, someone ran for president this year, whichever party, so you can feel good about yourselves, whichever party, and they said, if I'm elected, I'm going to disincorporate the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You would have a problem with that person, regardless of the political party, at least I hope you would. The question is asked, what would we do if the president sent Secretary, so there's a rumor, remember Secretary Harris, the same Broughton Harris who was such a problem earlier in the decade, he's a Republican and his dad's a wealthy, important Republican, and so there's a rumor that they might appoint Broughton Harris to be the new territorial governor of Utah. And so when that rumor arrives, they ask Brigham Young, what will we do if the president sent Secretary Harris here as governor? Would we not also secede? President Young said, no. We will keep our records clean. We shall want to compare our records by and by, and we want to show on our part that we are right all the time. If the boys were right all the time, they ought to piss such a man as Harris out of the country or whittle him out. Yet if we submit to such mean things put upon us by the government, we shall get our reward, and they will get theirs. It is better for us to submit to those things which are unpleasant than for us to do wrong. For all the oppressions they put on us, God will bring them into judgment. Brigham Young is often mischaracterized as someone who's, so strident and selfish, and those are characterizations of his enemies. Even as back when he was leading the church in Nauvoo, it was the non-Latter-day Saint sheriff, Jacob Backenstoss, that's trying to get Brigham Young to sign on to bring the whole Nauvoo region to essentially level Warsaw, Illinois. And Brigham Young refuses to do it because at his heart he was a pacifist. He did not want violence. And so the Latter-day Saints are going to maintain their place in the Union, and in fact they're going to send troops to fight. While those troops are gone, however, laws will be passed. The Homestead Act will be passed, which they thought would destroy Mormonism, and the Moral Anti-Bigamy Act will be passed, making polygamy illegal, and then creating a justification for anti-Mormonism at the federal level for the remainder of the century. Because you could always say, the Mormons aren't good citizens. Well, yeah, but we're going to fight in your war for you. But are you polygamous? Well, yeah, but upstate, you're not good citizens. And so that by passing this law, they then are able to make this the case. So I know I've gone on too long, so I need to be done. But I want to share with you my testimony, studying these things, how grateful I am that we belong to the kingdom of God on earth. We can easily get caught up in political issues, especially in a presidential campaign year. But remember that we should all be a member of one thing first, and that's the kingdom of God on earth. That's what really matters. And if you ever find yourself supporting what a politician has to say over what the prophet of God on earth has to say, now's the time to take a full stop. That's not what these early saints did. These early saints didn't play their politics to decide which one was most beneficial. Their politics were whatever it is the kingdom of God on earth demands of me, even when it wasn't in their best interests. And so I hope that that's something we can do. We can support our prophet, President Nelson, and we can remember that it is the Gentile political world that our early ancestors were trying to get out of. The people who don't know who they really are. The people who had murdered the prophet rather than venerated him. We are those that are left to carry on that idea. And I bear my testimony that Joseph Smith was a prophet, and Brigham Young was a prophet, and I'm grateful for the early saints who settled Goshen because they are examples of people overcoming. I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
To give you for coming to us. It is our book.
Okay, good. I don't have it.
Nobody does.
Oh, good.
I pulled this line out when I was reading when we were preparing this for publication because this is something Phineas said that really struck me. My only desire is to do right. When he wrote about putting together everything that they were doing here and all the conflicts that kept coming up and the people that were complaining and the problems he had. He wrote a couple times, my only desire is to do right. And that's what I felt about Brigham Young, or about Phineas Cook, is that he was trying. We're not, how he was he able to do everything he wanted to? I don't know, but he tried to do what was right. So we also have a little treat here that's from
thank you.
Bear Lake raspberry variety because he settled in Bear Lake.
Okay, yes.
So we'll talk about that next year. So thank you very much. Do we have any questions that you'd like to ask here?
I'm sorry that was so long. I apologize.
We enjoyed it though. Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience, or Spencer, did anyone ask any questions online?
Tell us the name of your podcast.
Oh, it's called Standard of Truth. Yeah, the podcast. Yep. So you can get it on like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Amazon or whatever. But Standard of Truth. We answer church history questions and stuff.
Anybody else? Any questions? Yes.
Is this talk written down?
No. Nope.
No, did videotape it? And
Yeah,
we'll put it on our
I mean,
YouTube channel.
it was pretty
Okay.
extemporaneous in that regard. I mean, hopefully some documents are tied together, but yeah.
Awesome. Anybody else? So we'll prepare this, and maybe in a week or so, it'll be up on our YouTube channel.
Could you please find my ancestor Lot Smith, and I'm
Well, so you saw his picture. You're like, that's Locksmith. I was out of time. I wanted to spend all kinds of time on Locksmith, and then I was like, everyone already hates me. So I decided not to. But Locksmith leads the detachment of troops that go out to serve the Union Army, in the Civil War. And so, think about this irony. Their laws are being passed against the Mormons. President Lincoln telegraphs directly to Brigham Young. Brigham Young's not the governor of Utah, but he telegraphs to Brigham Young and says, would the Mormons raise a troop? And Locksmith is the leader of them, and leader of the Nauvoo Legion. And so they raised up and they sent out. And the great irony is, because while they are gone out fighting for the Union, they will not come home as heroes, they will come home as criminals, because many of them left more than one wife at home when they left. And the law is an ex post facto law, making polygamy illegal retroactively. And so the fact that they leave more than one wife means that they come home. Now, they're not going to be prosecuted for a decade or so because they have to get things together, but it's a great example of this kind of dichotomy between the two. But yeah, that's what Locksmith was doing.
Is he related to Joseph Smith?
How is he related to the Smiths of Hiram Smith family? Is he related at all to George A?
No.
I don't think so. Yeah, it's a different Smith. Yeah. But I want to make sure. I've got a relative here. I don't want to say that he's not.
Anyone else? Any questions? Okay, let's thank Gerrit for coming. We appreciate it.